Hey everybody, what's up? I do apologize if the camera goes off a little bit early and I have to redo this, or I have to do it in two parts. Well, eventually my videos end up in two parts anyway. I do apologize for that. And I do apologize if you hear a little squeaking or growling. That's my dog. She's playing a little bit. And if you hear the wind in the background, we got that northwest wind that's come in, that Ajax, as they've been calling it. You know, coming in and, you know, having its way, if you will. And I do apologize if I'm sniffing a lot of, you know, that. If I'm doing that, if I got the sniffles, I'm getting over a cold. And something like this doesn't help out either. So, with that said though, as you can see by the title, this is a very unusual cartoon Flashback HD episode. You see, usually I come out here and I talk about certain series and stuff, what have you. But instead, what I'm going to do here is talk about something that I want to thank Matt Burnett, or yeah, I think that's his last name, Burnett, Animat, if you will, at Animat's reviews and classic reviews and animation look back. We're kind of talking about this, kind of mentioning this, because I had no idea this was the reason we don't hear about Filmation anymore. I mean, I pretty much thought after a while maybe they had slowly died out throughout the past, you know, not that long ago. I thought they slowly died out. Well, they were slowly just an independent corporation now that every now and then might spit out a new animated series or some kind of animation deal or whatever. But I had no idea whatsoever that the direction it was going in is what killed it. You see, Filmation, for a lot of you that don't know, is very well known for distributing not just movies, but television shows mostly. Mostly animated, some live action. Some of its more noticeable contributions to television animation have been the Fat Albert and Cosby Kids, Secret Life, live action wise, and I think animation wise, ISIS. ISIS, and I'm not talking that terrorist group or anything. I mean, I'm talking about the goddess Isis. I think that's her name. The Secrets of Isis or something like that. Their take on Ghostbusters, which was an animated take on a live action Ghostbusters show. They also did Brave Star, I think, as well as most notably, and probably more famous for anything, they did He-Man and She-Ra. Like I said, they also did Brave Star, and I think there were several others. I think they may have helped on the Mysterious Cities of Gold. I'm not really sure. They may have contributed to that, but mostly it's the ones along with others that they had. Mostly it's the ones that I've mentioned along with the more notable ones like He-Man and She-Ra and Brave Star that they did. So basically that is what Filmation is mostly known for when it comes to contributing to television animation. Now, of course, they had done film as well. They had done some movies all the way back to, I think, the late 60s or something like that, early 70s. Some were based on novels like Journey to the Center of the Earth, stuff like that. And then they would also do things sort of similar to like Looney Tunes in a sense. In fact, one of the more notable things that they did was a crossover with one of the more popular properties from the 70s and 80s, and that was Groovy Ghoulies, which is another show they did as well, but mostly for Saturday mornings. And Groovy Ghoulies, one of the more notable things about this, and I'm very fortunate to have the crossover, along with Zara Nizrak, he has it as well, They did a crossover with Warner Brothers and the Looney Tunes called Daffy and Porky Meet the Groovy Ghoulies. So that was kind of cool in a sense. That was kind of really cool in a sense. That was kind of cool in a sense to know about that. I didn't even know they did that. It was kind of cool. And I think they also contributed to a lot of the ABC Saturday Superstar movies back in the 70s. I'm not really sure. I think they contributed to some of them. But like I say, most notably were He-Man, She-Ra, Brave Star, Groovy Ghoulies, and I think several others. But like I said, when it came to movies, they did do movies as well. Like I said, they did live-action adaptations of some classic novels like Journey to the Center of the Earth. I think they did Gulliver's Travels, just to name a few. But some of the more notable ones they did, especially in my opinion, is He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword, and the Brave Star movie. Now, He-Man and She-Ra, the Secret of the Sword, and the Brave Star movie did have theatrical runs, did have runs in theaters. Brave Star probably more or less than He-Man and She-Ra, due to the fact that, well, it was a movie that was supposed to serve as a finale to the series. He-Man and She-Ra was basically the 5-episode pilot, put together as a movie to introduce us to She-Ra. So that's what Secret of the Sword was. Now they did continue on, like I said, with other shows even after that. I can't think of them right off the bat. But then somewhere between the releasing of He-Man, She-Ra, Brave Star, as well as their film movies, as well as their film adaptations, or big screen debuts, if you will, Filmation decided, and this is what I got from Animat, by watching Animat's reviews as well as his Let's Watch, because he was watching one of these movies that he was reviewing. Filmation decided to focus more into the movies, into animated films. But whoever was in charge, I don't know if it was Lou Schumacher or whatever his name is, one of the primary guys that always has his name come on during the, his name be one of the first things you see at the beginning of a show of like either He-Man, She-Ra, Brave Star, Ghostbusters, whatever. So I don't know if it was his idea or someone else's idea, but Filmation decided to again focus more on animated films during the later part of their existence, but not just on animated films that were, maybe adaptations of or big screen versions of some of their television properties. No. These were animated films that were based on classic stories. Now you might say, well, that's not a big deal, they've done it before, right? That's true, they have, but what these were sequels. These were unofficial, unauthorized, in my opinion, sequels to Disney films. That's right. Filmation, and again, I don't know if it was Lou Schumacher or whoever it was that may have come up with this decision, but they decided, excuse me for a second. Need to get that. But they decided, for some odd reason, that instead of going back to what they did for theatrical films like in the 70s and early 80s and late 60s, basically adapt, classic novels and fairy tales that maybe Disney hadn't touched at the time for an animated theatrical film. Whoever was that came up with this decision, again, like I said, I don't know if it was Lou that came up with it or somebody else, but they decided to create unofficial, unauthorized, in my opinion, sequels to two of Disney's animated classics. In fact, sequels to the first two Disney animated classics. That's right. These movies that they did were intended, in their eyes, with no harm whatsoever, I guess, because they probably thought there was no harm, no foul, were intended to be sequels to those movies. The first one was Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, which was a sequel to Walt Disney's Pinocchio. And why was it a sequel? Because it takes place a little after the movie, after the classic movie. Basically, it's after, Pinocchio becomes human, stuff like that. And basically, that's what it was intended to be. The next one that came after it was Snow White and I think the Land of Doom. I think that's what it was called, the Land of Darkness. No, it's the Land of Doom or something like that. And that was intended to be a sequel to Walt Disney's first animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now again, maybe in their eyes there was no harm, no foul. Maybe there was no harm, no foul. Maybe they thought that. I'm not really sure. I can't really say. Again, maybe they thought it was no harm, no foul. Hold on for a sec. Again, maybe they thought it was no harm, no foul. Again, like I said, maybe they thought it was, sorry about that, I was just looking at my dog there. Perhaps they thought it was no harm, no foul, but Disney apparently didn't think the same way. Because Disney probably saw the advertisements, the promotions and advertisements, but basically got word overall of what was going on, and they said, ain't gonna happen, no. So what did they do? I don't know if it was after Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, or something like that, or somewhere in between, but Disney decided to sue Filmation for, as I would look at it, copyright, basically probably the earliest form of copyright infringement. Because basically they were copywriting off of Disney's back, in their eyes. Basically Disney saw the fact that Filmation had not gotten their permission to continue a sequel, to continue the stories that they had already done back in the late 30s and early 40s. Now I know some of you might think, well, they shouldn't have gotten their permission. Snow White and Pinocchio are universal films. There have been so many takes on them. What's the big deal? And that is a good question, but here's an answer to that. And I'm sure if you would have asked Matt himself, he'd tell you the same thing. Or maybe something similar. Here's the thing. Even though there doesn't seem like there would have been any harm done, basically Filmation was continuing the Disney adaptations, is what they were doing. Instead of going to Disney and saying, hey, can we continue your story of your take on Snow White or your take on Pinocchio with two films? Instead of going to them and probably saying, okay, this is in collaboration with Disney, Disney saw the fact that they were just doing it on their own. And that's what caused, in the background, in the behind the scenes kind of deal, that's what caused Filmation a lot of financial trouble to the point of bankruptcy. Now, true, they did distribute the films. In fact, I remember as a kid, and I don't know why I vividly remember these kind of things, but as a kid you remember certain things. I remember back in the 80s and even the early 90s, Pinocchio, I remember back in the 80s when they did Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, I remember specifically watching some cartoons during Saturday morning or something like that, and all of a sudden during one of the commercials that would come on would be a TV spot for Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, cool. And I did see that, I think. I did see that once or twice. I can't really remember. And I did see that And I did see that about once or twice, maybe, I don't know. So I did see the movie. The other one that came after it was Happily Ever After, which again, if you watch Animat's review, I think he said the original title, and you can even look this up online, was Snow White and the Land of Darkness, or the Land of Doom, or something like that. And again, just like with Pinocchio, it was intended to be a continuation of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But like I said, Disney saw this, and like Animat said, decided to sue the pants off them because basically they had not gotten permission from Disney to continue their adaptation, their version of Snow White and Pinocchio. Now, like I mentioned earlier, some of you might say, well, there shouldn't be a problem, those are universal stories. That's true. And it wouldn't be a problem if any other studio may have done it. It probably wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that these were continuations in the eyes of Disney, and rightfully so, continuations of their adaptations. In other words, their versions. So basically, Disney saw Filmation doing something without their consent, without coming to them and say, hey, can we do, asking them to license out their adaptations to do sequels for. So yeah, you know, first one was Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night. And like I said, I remember watching commercials for that during Saturday mornings and I think even weekday afternoons. Then, several years later, Happily Ever After came out. Now here's the thing though. Animat said that Happily Ever After had come out in 1993 here in North America, here in the States, and in Canada. That is true. Because originally, I don't know if originally in the UK and I think several other areas, it had come out 3 years prior. That's right. Filmation originally in 1990 had released Happily Ever After in several other regions, and I think they released it as Snow White and the Land of Doom. But when it came over here to the States, that's when I believe they had to switch it up to Happily Ever After because of the fact that Disney was suing the pants off them for basically not getting their permission, basically doing what I mentioned earlier, the earliest form of copyright infringement in some manner. Now, here's what's funny though. Filmation, had they stayed in business, because unfortunately what Pinocchio slowly started and the bleeding just continued, and Happily Ever After just, you know, finished off. Filmation financially was going into bankruptcy because of what they were doing, as well as along with the fact that Disney was suing them for not, you know, getting permission to do these sequels that were continuations of their adaptations. I know, it sounds strange. So basically, with that bleeding slowly increasing, and Happily Ever After being that final, you know, nail in the coffin, if you will, Filmation went out of business. They were done. But had they somehow survived, they would have had one more movie up their sleeve, and it might have come out 5 years later. And that was Robin and the Dream Weavers. I'm not lying. You can look it up on YouTube. It is there. Robin and the Dream Weavers is a movie that Lou Schumacher, I think that's his name, Filmation fame, was planning to release, I believe, under the Filmation title, under the Filmation name. But when Filmation went out of business, he just decided to try to release it on his own. Here's what's funny though. The movie, from what I understood, got a PG-13 rating. Unfortunately, it's the only movie fully animated in it. It's fully animated and everything. Don't get me wrong about that. It's fully animated, looks nice and everything. But it's the only movie that's got any kind of rating from the MPAA that's never been released in theaters. Nor has it ever been distributed, widely at all. No wide release on directed videos, no wide release for limited theatrical release. It was released just once, and I think that was for a promotional deal or something like that. I can't really remember. I think it was released just once, and that was it. It was pulled after that. And I think it's because of the fact of its content, which is why it got a PG-13 rating. Now, again, I think Liu had probably intentions and plans to release this under the Filmation name back when Filmation was still kind of in business. Maybe he was planning to do that, but unfortunately that didn't happen and he had to do it independently. And even though he got the rating he needed, nobody wanted to get behind it, I guess, and release it theatrically or as a direct-to-home video movie. So yeah, that's basically what happened in the long run with Filmation. And again, my honest opinion is I thought they were still kind of around until recently, like maybe mid-2000s or something like that. I had no idea they had died basically 22 years, 25 years ago. I had no idea that had happened. I mean, you want to know how bad Filmation was in the red to bankruptcy to basically, you want to know how bad they were? They were literally, and I don't mean any offense by this, they were literally on their deathbed getting someone to distribute the film Happily Ever After theatrically. Because I think they did get somebody, I can't think of it, to do Pinocchio, but they couldn't find anybody else because they were so in the red, they were on their deathbed, that they basically had to get somebody to come out and distribute them. And the person they got, and the people they got were First National Film Institute. Yeah, First National Film. Go figure, right? But that's basically what they got. First National Film are the people that distributed the film Happily Ever After theatrically. And again, just like Pinocchio, I remember seeing advertisements for it. So, and here's what's funny. There's no doubt in my mind, Lou Schumacher and Filmation, they had good intentions. I just think they basically just didn't go through the right channels. They didn't come out right out and ask Disney, hey, can we do this? And I think that's what caused them a lot of trouble. I think that's what did it. So, I mean, and when you take a look at how in Happily Ever After, and I think even with Pinocchio, how some of the characters have been switched around so that there is no real identification. I mean, I'm sure with Happily Ever After and Emperor of Night, they were going to bring in new characters anyway, because with sequels, it's commonly known, animated or live action, that at most times you got to bring in a new character or so to be part of the group. So with both those movies, it probably wasn't it was probably already in the works that was going to happen. Which is why when you look at the dwarf elves in Happily Ever After, you look at them and you see why all 7 of them are female. Basically, they had the idea, I'm pretty sure of this, that, okay, Snow White met the 7 dwarfs who are all male, who are all men, in the first film, in Disney's movie, so why not have her, if we're continuing the story, meet the female cousins? And a lot of the female cousins look very human, except for Critterina, or Critterella, or whatever her name is. The Critter Girl, Critterina. She basically looks like a freaking anamorphic chipmunk. Which is kind of strange because there are several people on DeviantArt that draw her as a chibet. But yeah, her nose is like an animal's nose, so I guess she's part rodent or part animal. She basically looks like, if you take her out of the equations, that Critter Girl, it's like you could place her with, and replace everybody else with, it's like, you wouldn't even know she's an elf, or a dwarf elf. You wouldn't even know that she's a dwarf elf. You wouldn't know that. whatsoever. You wouldn't know that, at all, that she's a dwarf elf. You wouldn't. And the other characters kind of stand out in a sense as well. But you look at the Critterella, you look at Thunderella, and you're like, this is a kid? You got a kid part of the dwarf elves, and you got a freaking anamorphic animal as a dwarf elf? It's like, what's the deal? What's going on? But I think that's what Filmation had originally intended, was the fact that instead of going back with the dwarves, even if Disney had given them permission, they were going to go with the dwarf elves instead. I think that was the intentions in the first place. So, but overall, I'm not gonna look back that much. I'm not gonna look back at Filmation and think they didn't do good contributions, because they did. They gave us some good television shows, animated and even live action. They did do some decent films back in the late 60s, throughout the 70s, and even early to mid 80s. But I think it's when they decided to go in the direction to do sequels to the Disney classics is what really got them in trouble, because they didn't get the permission from Disney to do that. So I think that's what really kind of hurt them in the end. I think maybe they thought, like some of you are thinking, that it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. They're universal stories. But if you're adapting from the first movies that Disney had done, from Disney's adaptions, then yeah, it's going to be you're basically going to get yourself in a whole heap of trouble, which they did. So even though their intentions, in my opinion, probably were good, I think they didn't realize that they were doing what I look at as the first form of copyright. Basically doing, as I mentioned earlier, unofficial, unauthorized adaptations or sequels to the Disney classics. So I don't think they realized that they were going to cause trouble. I don't think they thought there was going to be any harm, no foul, but there was. So that's what, again, Pinocchio, Emperor of the Night started the bleeding, and I think Happily Ever After is what killed it off. And basically Happily Ever After, and as Animat put it, killed it off. So that's all I'm going to say on Filmation on this edition of the Cartoon Flashback HD. Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like. And watch Animat's reviews and his Let's Watch, which is on Happily Ever After. And I'll talk to you all later.